Welcome to Elements of Storytelling. In this part, we are going to talk about plot. So, to begin, plot is the series of events that take place in a story. And most of the time when we talk about plot, and you've probably done it before, you've used a plot diagram, like this one here. So you've probably already done this, but let's review the elements of plot, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about each one of them. So first is the exposition, which is the part of a work that introduces the characters, the setting, and the basic situation. So this is the beginning of a novel or play or story. You can see that this box here gives specific examples of things that might be found in the exposition. First, it'll introduce the protagonist and antagonist. So this is protagonist being the main character, and the antagonist being the opposing force, whatever is hindering or getting in the way of our main character. And to skip down to conflict, usually what happens is our main character is going to be in conflict with whatever this opposing force is. So for conflict, we need to know that it is a struggle between two opposing forces. And external conflict is when a character is against an opposing force, such as another character, nature, or society. Now on your EOC, they're going to phrase it, they're going to ask you about external conflict by asking you to look at something or read something and pick whether it's man versus man, which would be another character, man versus nature, man versus society, sometimes it's man versus technology. And then the other option is internal conflict, which is instead of a character being against nature or another character, they have conflict within themselves, such as maybe an important decision. This on your EOC would be man versus self, which is an internal conflict. Now going back to setting. Setting, of course, is the time and place in which a story occurs, and this can be extremely important. For instance, if your story takes place during wartime, there's lots of different things that can happen during it. Versus peacetime, if it's in the future versus the past, there's lots of differences in technology. Like there's an episode of Seinfeld where they get lost because one person knows where they're going and they're trying to follow them in a car, but it ends up in a crazy bad situation, they all get lost. That wouldn't have happened if Seinfeld was set in 2013, because they would have had cell phones to call each other or GPSs to be able to find out where everything was. So the setting can be extremely important to your plot in your story. So after the exposition, which is going to set up these main characters, the setting, and probably set up the main conflict in the story, you're going to get your rising action. Rising action is the series of events that lead up to the climax, and they're moved forward through conflict. So even though your conflict is going to be introduced in your exposition, it's going to build and increase through your rising action until finally it gets to your climax, which is the high point of interest, suspense, or the turning point of your story. So this is where the story is leading to. This is kind of the main point of your story, the big final thing that's going to happen. And your conflict is going to come to a head right here. Now your falling action, with falling action and resolution, both of these, sometimes they are right next to each other. There's very little falling action, sometimes no falling action. But falling action are the events after the climax that lead to the resolution. So these are just small things that take place after the big final turning point of the story that lead to the resolution. Resolution, which can also be called denouement. So this is where the conflict is resolved and a general insight may be conveyed. So the conflict that has been introduced in your exposition builds through your rising action, comes to a head in your climax, is going to finally be resolved in your resolution. And also this general insight may be conveyed. That just means that maybe a lesson of the story can be told. That can be directly told, or may just be an implied lesson that we can learn from the events that took place in the plot. So moving on from that, with a plot, we also have to have structure and pacing. So structure is going to be the order in which the author arranges the events in the plot. So your plot, you have your plot diagram like we just went over, but an author doesn't have to just go through the plot events in order. They can switch it up a little bit. It's like a piece of DNA. So in DNA, you have little amino acids in there that get moved around, adenine, thionine, whatever else you have in there. And if you just replace or swap two of these little acids in there, it can change a lot of things. It can change, I don't know, your hair color, your eye color, whether you get a certain disease or not. Any kind of thing can change by just a small rearranging of these little things in your body. So structure of a story is kind of the same way, because the author has a plot, but they can choose to rearrange the order of these events in the plot, and it can really change the way a story is told. So first, most of the time, your structure is going to be chronological, which is where events unfold in a sequence from beginning to end. This is time order. Everything happens in order. But they can also use things like flashbacks, which interrupt the flow of chronological events to describe earlier events. You see a lot of this in the show Family Guy. Let's go back to it.
They're gaming on us. Oh, we never should have stolen this film.
Oh, man, this is even more intense than that time I forgot how to sit down.
Alright, so sorry it's so blurry, but you get the point. The flashback, they're going through something in the middle of the action, and then it goes back to the past to describe a previous event. The next thing that can be used is foreshadowing. This is kind of like the opposite of a flashback. Instead of going back to the past from the present action, it hints at something that's going to happen in the future. Hints at plot developments that might later occur. So kind of like this guy, coming up, it's going to be there in the future. Usually it's not that obvious, but foreshadowing will hint at things that happen in the future. Next, you can also have parallel plots. And this is when an author develops two different storylines, kind of like two different plot diagrams, with two sets of characters in a single work. This is kind of like parallel lines. So you can see there's two different stories going at the same time in the same work. Now, unlike parallel lines, a lot of times parallel plots will eventually cross, where some of the characters from one plot meet with characters in the other plot that's going on at the same time. But they may not. It may just be two distinct storylines or more going on in the same work. So now I can move on to pacing. Pacing is going to be the speed or the rhythm of writing within a novel or story. So this is not like rhythm in poetry, but it's basically the pace, how fast or slow your story is moving. So fast pacing is going to use short, fragmented sentences to create excitement, and slow pacing is going to slow it down with and create suspense by filling a story with ellipses or excruciatingly minute details and long sentences. So I'm actually going to show you a video that kind of does this with film instead of writing, and then we'll compare the two. Well, I would do that. Here we go.
For this video, we're going to look at the effects of fast and slow cutting. They say rules are made to be broken, but sometimes rules are made because they work. Editing is a powerful aspect to movie making. How quickly you cut from one shot to another can have a profound effect on the viewer. How exciting would a car chase be if you only had one shot to work with? Not too thrilling. Let's try cutting from more than one camera angle. More's not always better. For this, we're going to have a nice romantic scene. Faster cutting won't work as well. Let's try that again. With the same shots, let's slow it down. Like all other aspects of making a movie, the pacing of the editing can be used to tell the story more effectively.
Alright, so even though they changed music and some other things on there, you can see the difference. Fast pacing created excitement by cutting through shots quickly. With writing, that is going to be cutting through sentences quickly. Slow pacing not only slowed it down to make it more appropriate to the setting, but it also slowed it down to create a little more suspense. In the first example, if there were all the fast cuts, you weren't held in suspense for what was she going to do with the gift, was she going to like it or not. Suspense was created by using slower pacing to kind of drag that moment on a little bit. And instead of cuts, this will be with longer sentences and more detail in your writing. Alright, and that's it for plot for today.